Salutations and fist bumps, folks. I know I'm late, but let's rock. First of all, let's just acknowledge the sheer genius of this show. The title of this episode is Glorious Purpose, and the title of the very first episode of Loki ever was also Glorious Purpose, which sets the tone before you even hit the button to go into the episode, saying that this is going to bookend everything with Loki in this particular situation, which at this point now has been confirmed that Tom Hiddleston is not returning as Loki. So thank you, Tom, for everything that you've given us in terms of Loki inside of the MCU. We will miss you tremendously if you're not coming back and you're actually retiring for real. And yes, and again, like I said, I got all of that before even opening the darn thing. Y'all have no idea. The feels, oh my goodness, they were everywhere. The finale helps us learn more about Loki's glorious purpose as he stitches together the past in terms of all of the branches from the timeline. And this episode wastes zero time getting to the actual meat of everything that we're looking for and all the excitement, because we start with the Marvel title card at the beginning, which then leads us backward through the Marvel fanfare, replaying some of the most iconic moments inside of the MCU. And it's in the exact reverse order that we would have seen all of the other fanfares from the other episodes, which also gives us a little bit of a glimpse on what is going to possibly happen with Kang. And I believe that this is the same music that is played at the end of Loki as well. This episode then opens with the amount of radiation, or giving us an example of all of the amount of radiation that is currently outside of the TVA, which also looks like a cloud of smoke as it starts, further helping us understand why Victor had no chance of survival at all. Loki then snaps back to the loom area, and in this sequence we're now able to see different perspective of the conversation that was had before Victor entered the loom area. And we also get more time spent with Victor here, which makes knowing what is going to come next that more painful to actually watch. But as we experience Victor being spaghettified once again and again and again, this brings up another key point, because at the end of episode 5, Loki starts reaching out for the strands of time that are evaporating around him that basically are his friends that he's trying to hold on to, which by the end of this episode, we see him do the same thing, but this time with the ability to actually grab them. So the fact that Loki goes to Obi and asks him, what could we have done differently, is an early indication that he has an idea of what he can do with this power, but he doesn't know how to actually control it yet. The feels will be even more palpable if you fist bump the like button at this point, because if you don't, you won't be able to feel the same things that I'm feeling. And Obi's answer sets Loki off in a spiral when he says, we took too long. And now at this point, Loki believes that speed is the only way to win the game, which by the way is something that Tony and crew tried to use on Thanos when trying to remove the gauntlet from his arm. However, similar to the way that Tony realizes that his hero moment is going to have to come from sacrifice and not speed, Loki has a similar realization when he realizes that speed will not be enough. And as the pep talk with Victor is recreated, this time with Loki's actual instructions, the song being played underneath is a fifth of Beethoven, which itself is an adaptation of Symphony No. 5, which is significant because each movement inside of Symphony No. 5 is a major key movement, and the different events highlighted in the montage of Loki correcting things inside of the timeline were major events that needed to happen in order to get Victor inside of that room. And inside of this sequence, we actually hear Loki say to Victor not to put the multiplier down, which he references later inside of the episode. And as Victor continues to get spaghettified again and again and again, it seems as if he's starting to experience this earlier and earlier in time, because at the end, he's standing inside of the blast doors area, which suggests that Loki's suggestion of faster has them opening the doors earlier and earlier, which actually seems like it might work at one point, and then Victor
fall down, go
boom! Meanwhile, as everyone in the room is panicking and freaking out, Loki is channeling his inner Jimmy Butler. And as we track back even further, Loki brings Timely down to meet Obi for the first time. And when he does, Timely makes the exact same noise that he made when he met him in episode 4 for the first time there.
Oh bee or a Boris? Guess what?
Which to me is absolutely hilarious. And now, a word from our sponsor, me. Yes, of course, I am the sponsor for the actual channel. But there is a link down in the description if you want to have at a moment's notice, at a moment's glance before you go into a theater to see any comic book movie going forward into perpetuity. If you want to understand everything in terms of that particular character before, in a 5-minute synopsis before you hit the theater, what I need you to do is click the link down inside of the description, because what I built is a newsletter that also will in the future come with an app, and inside of that app, or coming soon inside that app, will be all of the things or relevant things for that particular character that you will need to know before going into that movie theater to see that particular movie, so you're not in the dark. So if you want that type of power to go inside of your pocket before you go into a theater, click the link down below and register or leave your email, and I will send you a notification when everything is actually ready. Sylvie and Mobius have a very confused look on their faces as Loki explains the entire thing as if he has been there before, because he has 1,000 times over a century. And you can actually hear Sylvie ask Loki, why are you being so weird? But add to this fact and understand that she's possibly been with Loki since episode 4 when she passed through that time door. And remember, again, she said that she remembered who he was when he showed up in front of her at the end of episode 4. Obi and Timely have another fan/bro moment again, and as Loki brings up the loom model for the group, we get a callback to Obi's obsession with perfection when he mentions the amount of coats of paint that he has been able to apply to his prototype so far. And we get another Victor moment where he calls Loki Wizard, which every time it happens is just, again, hilarious. And then Loki gives the entire group some confidence, or tries to at least, displaying that everything is going to work out fine because we have everything that we need, including the prototype from Victor. And like I said earlier, we fast forward to centuries later when Loki then demonstrates how the temporal aura scanner works, telling Victor Timely that it's safe to put his head inside of it. And we find out that duct tape is a very real thing inside of the TVA, because Loki demonstrates or mentions that the reason why Victor is basically being spaghettified every time he goes outside of the TVA is because there's a latch and some duct tape that is missing on his suit, which, by the way, is also what Obi uses to secure Mobius's suit as well. And then again, we get another callback to the fact that the multiplier will roll off if it is put down for any reason, which per Loki, you should never do. And then Mobius has a flashback moment when he asks Loki, what are you doing?
Hey, what are you doing?
Which sounds like he's remembering what happened in season 1, episode 2. When Loki actually goes through a time door after being pretty convincing that he was on the side of the TVA. Then when Victor says things feel a bit rushed, Loki responds with, if you stop, you die, which he responds, or Timely specifically responds and says, that's reassuring. Not really. We then get the scene from the trailers where Loki is holding a retro studio mic, which we now know he is now talking to Victor Timely. And as Victor heads out into the gangway, we call back to a few moments earlier where Victor actually almost made it out before being obliterated, which lends itself to the fact that speed does have its place inside of his weaponry, but it's not the biggest weapon that Loki has. This shows that what Timely is possibly experiencing is time moving faster than it actually is, and it's actually moving very, very slowly, which, by the way, actually added to the suspense of the moment. Will he actually have strength to get to the end of the gangway? Will he have enough strength to pick up the multiplier and put it in there?
Is he ready to face Cell all by himself? Find out on the next Dragon Ball Z.
And I literally sat on the edge of my seat as I am right now, literally like this as I watched it. Loki then tells Timely to hit the green button, and further telling him that it can be a little sticky, which he would have figured this out after the thousands of times that he has seen this over the centuries that he's done this. And the sound that we hear as as the multiplier docks with the loom and fires into it is the same sound that we hear inside of the prototype situation, or the example of the prototype that Loki explains earlier. And for me, this was a nice touch. I love how He Who Remains actually set this entire system's sound to be very similar to a pinball machine, which to me shows his playful side in terms of the design of the TVA. And now, seemingly that everything is going to actually work out the way that it's supposed to, a refreshing moment between the Loom crew and the audience happens here. Well, at least for me, because I had all of the feels all up inside here. And did Timely have a similar situation in terms of his time in the Loom suit that Scott and Cassie actually have? Because when he comes out of the suit, he says, "Pumpkins," which to me sounded like a cry for food at that point, which seems also like a callback to the way that Cassie and Scott Lang always are asking for citrus after they've gone through becoming giants and then shrinking themselves back down.
Does anyone have any orange slices?
But this also could have just been a very good ad-lib that they decided to keep. And okay, I've said it on this channel, I will say it again, J Majors absolutely bodies Timely every single time he's on the screen. But does he have to scream wizard every single time he sees Loki? And furthermore, him calling Loki wizard is just comical in itself. Just for the record, it is never not going to be hilarious. But as Loki and Timely celebrate, you can still see the steam coming off of Timely's suit, which shows the danger that Timely was still actually in. Though if his suit was smoking, it would either be really, really cold or really hot. So how in the world is Loki actually touching him this soon so closely? But then reality sets in. Victor explains what's actually happening to the timeline branches and why what they thought was going to work actually won't anymore. The branches are multiplying at an infinite rate, which for me further connected the Timely Obi relationship, because Obi, literally his name means infinity, and Timely, he fits directly inside of everything that's going on with time, space, and everything that has to happen inside of time travel. So with his invention and the fact that Obi is who he is, the connection is just too strong for me to pass up in this moment, because everything leads back to infinity, which by the way is the situation that started this whole thing in the first place. And as he explains this, it brings back the conversation that He Who Remains, Sylvie, and Loki had in episode 6 of season 1, which to me seems to be the thing that Loki is recalling here as he sits down. And as a reminder, that conversation shows through his images on his desk in terms of He Who Remains, the infinity problem that eventually leads to his variance showing back up, because it's like trying to divide by 0. It doesn't work. Then Sylvie has the biggest aha moment of her entire life, because she says,
"It's almost as if as soon as the timeline started branching, this was doomed to happen."
You think?
You ain't just whistling Dixie!
He was right all along. As she has this out loud moment of clarity, Loki gives her the meanest side eye I have ever seen in the MCU to date. I mean, scathing. Yeah. But as the loom explodes once again, we get a semi-close-up of Loki leading us into the moments of episode 6 in season 1. But this time though, notice that the camera is flipped, which symbolizes the difference of outcomes inside of this scenario. And now hearing Loki say,
I've been where you are,
hits differently. And this is before he actually time slips back. It's because of the way that this is framed. Because Loki literally now knows exactly what Sylvie has been feeling this entire time, her entire life. Helplessness. Helplessness because none of this can be changed due to their current actions, and everything goes wrong if they follow through. Then as Sylvie mentions the seduction of a throne, we can now see the full circle of Loki's heart come out here. Because at the beginning, all he wanted was the throne, but at the end, what he now wants is community. Because after seeing and experiencing the TVA and what his life is and what it would have been, he is completely self-sacrificing at this point. The sequence that follows this completely solidifies the reason why I think, have thought, and will continue to think that Sylvie was, and always will be the catalyst for everything that has happened inside of the multiverse timeline and everything that is going on right now. Never mind the fact of what Renslayer did to her. The sheer understanding that Loki cannot kill her is the main reason why I am saying this and standing on it so firmly. First, because he actually loves her, and second, because that would actually be like killing himself. And then He Who Remains breaks the fourth wall in that room after Loki tells him to fight back. Actually was something that I would have thought that he was able to do the entire time. So when Loki actually tells him to fight back, that was my first thought when I saw him just give up himself in episode 6 of season 1. But as He Who Remains spells out everything that has happened up until this time that he has paved the way for.
Hence the TVA. Hence ages and ages of cosmic harmony.
Loki actually conceals the fact that he is actually more powerful than he was the first time that he encountered He Who Remains. And I have to believe that he does this because he's trying to dupe He Who Remains into giving up all of the answers before he shows his hand. And when He Who Remains actually details the fact that he would not have just let Sylvie kill him, it shines a bigger light on why the branches are the way that they are and continually to become infinite in the way that they do. It's his failsafe, which he then later confirms in the episode. Oh, and if you didn't pick this up, He Who Remains actually refers to himself as HWR, so we are going to do the same thing here. Then we hear a quote from Loki saying, "We die with the dying, we're born with the dead," which is a quote from the poem Little Getting by T.S. Eliot. The quote here and the poem at large seem to demonstrate that time is never what we seem to think it is. It is something that is fluid, mostly repetitive, and never ending. And from the look on his face, it seems like HWR doesn't know that one. So Loki then pulls rank at this point.
And what makes you think this is the first time we've had this conversation?
And he does this with not much effort at all, which gives more fuel to the fire that he is now more powerful than HWR. And HWR now confirms what I was mentioning earlier in the video. The loom was always a failsafe for him. And there is no other way than the sacred timeline way, because that is how he actually designed it, which for me suggests that this has happened way more times than just this once. Could erasing the TVA's memory actually be the loom exploding and then being reconstructed again with the sacred timeline? And if that was the case, was Miss Minutes actually in charge of the entire thing? Then He Who Remains says the outcome to this equation is the same. You lose, which are actually words that tell us exactly how Loki can win, because the only way is sacrifice, which I believe is what he comes to the realization of when he says, "I know." And at the tail end of their conversation about the dealings of the timeline, Loki asks He Who Remains a key question. Is this mercy for him, meaning Loki, or is this mercy for He Who Remains? Because possibly he's trying to keep himself from feeling a certain type of emotion, which might be regret, because he could be trying to hold on to something or someone. Then He Who Remains actually says, make the hard choice, which in this particular scenario is a choice that Loki has to make between killing Sylvie or letting everything play out the way that it is. But it also has an underlying meaning to He Who Remains at this point as well, because he also had to make a hard choice when he had to remember or make the decision to erase his relationship with Ravonna every single time that he did it. And when he also mentions earlier that he basically has been sitting in this chair at the end of time lonely, he's also saying that what he has been trying to hold on to, he is never going to actually have, and he doesn't really like that very much. But this then leads us into the time theater where Loki was brought into in season 1 and episode 1, which at this point details his drive for a throne. Again, calling back to how he looked at life before the TVA. Because at this moment, Loki actually says that his life was a waste of time, possibly pointing to the fact that he was doing something wrong or that he was chasing the wrong thing in terms of his purpose. Even down to the fact that he now asks for help, which before he would never do, which I believe is the reason why he can relate and eventually supersede He Who Remains. Or should I say he gets comfortable with it if he wasn't before. Then we hear another key statement both to this series and in life. You gotta keep the bigger picture in mind. But in this sequence, the story that is being told is by Mobius saying that a variant was supposed to have been pruned and found out that that variant was actually an 8-year-old boy. He further then says that the hunter could not carry out the task that was at hand, and the hunter that he seems to be talking about is himself.
I did it! I did it! I dropped the screw in the tuna!
Detailing that later Renslayer steps in to take care or prune a Loki variant, which is what we see inside of the story with Renslayer and Sylvie. But the damage was already done. So when Loki says, I understand that the timekeepers and all the dogma, but it's you, this is what he comes to a realization of as Mobius actually explains this story. Because now he remembers, or now he understands, that what he was supposed to experience actually was given to him gracefully. Then the final moments here explain how Renslayer became a judge. But it also explains why Mobius became so wrapped up in the TVA, and more specifically wrapped up inside of Loki in general. Because the burden that Mobius felt due to his own glorious purpose was a huge weight to bear, more than he actually could. So basically he hid himself inside of his work, no longer going back to the timeline or really looking for himself in the timeline anymore.
You found out you're a variant, and you haven't even looked, have you?
And I gotta bring back the feels because they came again. This time though, in the moment between Mobius and Loki at the end. Because as Mobius disappears from the time theater and then in the next scene, the feels hit different. I mean, I can't explain it. It's just, especially now that we know that this is Tom's last hurrah or finale as Loki, his thank you to Mobius feels like a swan song and hit me right here, directly to him and also to us as the fans. Then, as Loki places himself and Sylvie outside of time, Sylvie finally says the words out loud. Loki has to kill her, or at least the idea of her. Because, by the way, per Mobius's story, he was supposed to have been pruned himself. So, any of his variants being alive on any part of the timeline is a complete chaos theory, without them having to do anything at all. Which brings them both to a moment of clarity that destroying something to rebuild it is mostly a good thing, if that something can be destroyed and built better. And then when we cut back to the blast doors being opened, something hit me like a ton of bricks. The first time that the doors were opened, in terms of them going out into the loom area in episode 4, Loki actually does volunteer himself.
To move fast. Who's it gonna be?
I'll do it.
But he is then outbid by Timely because he knows how it works. Add to this, the first time that anyone went out to the gangway of the loom, it was Mobius, although it should have been Loki. And he possibly doesn't go out there the first time because he doesn't understand the power that he possesses, but he had it the whole time, which makes what he has to do at the end more understandable now. And his hero clarity moment happens as he enters or heads down to the blast doors. More specifically, as he looks back to Mobius and Sylvie. And another giveaway that Loki actually had this power even before this point in time is the way that he moves before going out into the gangway for the loom. Because he does the exact same movement and posture, gesture, or whatever you want to call it, as he does when he time slips. As he walks down the gangway, what Obi said would happen to anyone's skin as they walk out there does happen to Loki, because his skin is ripped off of his body, but not the actual physical skin, more of a revealing of his original nature. And the stance that he has here actually calls back to the same stance that old man Loki had when he faced Elias. And then as Loki looks back at the crew, he looks specifically at Timely and Sylvie, almost as if to say to them and the variants, I figured it out. I now know how to fight this war, which seems like it is solidified by Sylvie saying he's giving us a chance. And then Loki sitting at the end of time inside of his throne at this point symbolizes two things. The Citadel is now gone because he destroyed it, and Loki now has complete control over the timeline, or at this point is now outwardly expressed because he always had control over the timeline in general. The TVA is now no longer governed by a timeline anymore, or a sacred timeline at all, but more of a tree. And their new motto is now, let's grow together. And at this point, it seems to be that B-15 is the head person inside of the TVA. Then B-15 and Mobius have a conversation about the variants of He Who Remains. And Mobius then mentions that there was a incident on 616 adjacent realm, which actually could be the quantum realm, and he possibly could be talking about what happened with Ant-Man and the Ant Crew and Kang. Also, they think that none of He Who Remains' variants know who or what they're doing in terms of the TVA at this point. However, we know that the Council of Kangs has an idea of what's going on already. And we see again that Mobius is still having trouble coming to grips with his life on the timeline. B-15 then makes a mention that the panels of Kang are going to have to come down, which Mobius actually makes a good point that it's a good idea to keep them up for remembrance, which Mobius then drops a bigger bomb on B-15, displaying or saying that he is not going to be coming or joining her in the war room because he's going to actually be stepping away from the TVA. And then as we cut through a montage of different scenes, we see Timely as a boy, but this time he is no longer looking for or experiencing anything coming through the window. He does look for it though. Was he expecting something to happen? Then we see Renslayer lying in a field, and in the background is an Egyptian pyramid, which for me calls directly to the fact that she may either encounter Khonshu and become the Moon Knight, or experience the Moon Knight in wherever she is. And the noise made before she sees a figure in a hue of purple could either be caused by Agatha or Doctor Strange after revealing or trying to mend incursions. Now, the camera work detailing Mobius as he is looking at himself and his boys is absolutely perfect, and again produces every feel known to man, especially as they come to grips with the fact that Loki is no longer there. Then when Mobius has his moment similar to Cap's in Endgame, you can kind of see in his eyes what he's looking forward to when he says, I'll just stay here and let time pass, because what it seems like he wants is just to see his boys grow up, which is something that Loki can actually hear as he experiences the entirety of the timeline branches around him, allowing us to see the fulfillment of what Loki actually wanted, his friends around him, but more so his friends being happy where they are. And now that we know all of this, it's a very good idea to take some time